Tomorrow, the true race for the playoffs in the Western Conference begins. The most meaningful games in the last 16 years of Sacramento Kings basketball are here. Get your security blanket, get your stress ball, get your comfort food. You might need them. Kayte Christensen, Sacramento Kings television analyst, joins me to preview this playoff race right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season long. Today, presented by FanDuel, the official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer back in Sacramento. And let me tell you what, 50 degrees here in Sacramento feels wonderful compared to the 20s and 30s of Salt Lake City, but I'm happy to be back. I'm still recovering from, it's not really jet lag because it's only an hour time difference and the flight's not that long, but we went hard. ABC 10's coverage of Locked On and Locked On's coverage of All-Star Weekend, we went hard, so still recovering, but also getting myself mentally and physically ready for what I know is going to be a stressful, but also very fun playoff race that begins tomorrow night against the Portland Trailblazers. And I want to say this before we get to the conversation with Kayte Christensen. No matter what, whether we agree or disagree with how the Kings got to this point, agree or disagree with what the Kings should or should not have done at the trade deadline, no matter what happens, even if you're a pessimist or an optimist, even if the Kings lose or win, we're all on the same side. We all want the same thing. And I would hope that instead of pointing fingers at each other, and this goes both ways, if the Kings lose, instead of the "I told you so" people coming at us on Twitter, and instead of the optimists, if the Kings win, getting in the faces of all the pessimists and saying "I told you, you should have believed," instead we just rally together and support what is, in my opinion, going to be the most rewarding feeling in professional sports for this fan base, which is this team finally clinching a playoff spot. I truly believe it's going to happen. I stand by what I said before the All-Star break, stand by what I've said for the last handful of weeks. This team is a top 6 team in the Western Conference in my mind. They absolutely are. Now, I don't know if they're going to secure a top 4 and a home court advantage in the opening round, although it's a very strong possibility at this point, which I never thought possible coming into this season. So no matter what, let's enjoy this. We're going to be stressed. There's going to be, I'm sure, moments where we're angry at bad losses. There's going to be moments where we're elated and we don't want to get too high or too low, which is something, I struggle with here on the Locked On Kings podcast, right? Let's enjoy this race. We're going to freak out. It's going to be terrifying. It's going to be a lot of fun. And the light at the end of the tunnel, which is the Kings clinching a playoff berth, it's going to happen. I'm telling you, it is going to happen. And it is going to be so worth it. Here to preview these final 25 games, the difficult schedule, the experience that this team will get over the remainder of this season, the offense, the defense. We're going to talk about it all. Kayte Christensen, Sacramento Kings television color analyst. You hear her with Kyle Draper and Mark Jones on every single broadcast. She's nice enough to spend some time with me right here on Locked On Kings. The All-Star break has come to an end, which means let the tension, let the stress, but in my opinion, let the fun begin of a final stretch to this season that means more than basically every game from the last 16 years. And while I'm going to be sitting in the media section or sitting at home stressing out over every single game, Kayte Christensen has to be a professional on the microphone while broadcasting games. Kayte, you've been broadcasting here in Sacramento, working on the television side of things for a very long time. I imagine, even though it is going to be a stress of wanting to see this team succeed over the remaining stretch of the season, I imagine you're as excited as anyone to have meaningful game after meaningful game from here to hopefully into the playoffs.
Without a doubt. I mean, this has been the most exciting season since I came here in 2006. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be quite a ride. It's like the middle of the season, like really game 30 through, really 25 coming back from the All-Star break. Like that's the hard part of the season to maintain. your level of play, your level of excitement, focus, all those things. And so as tired as I was going into the All-Star break, and I can't believe it's almost over, I'm really excited for the last 25 games.
You're extremely well connected with the fans. You've been here a long time. So I know that you understand the maybe expectation of things to go wrong, or just that's how fans have been wired watching and paying attention to the Sacramento Kings for so long. But in your opinion, for those who are maybe putting more trust or more faith in the past and that coming back to kind of hurt them versus believing in this team, as this team has had nothing to do with any of this playoff drought, where do you fall on that line?
Well, I completely understand like the trauma that this fan base has endured over the last 16 years. But the way I look at it is I think when you're a player and you're coming into an organization that has experienced the kind of drought that the Kings have, you feel a pressure, but at the same time, not as much maybe as the fan base and the organization as a whole feels, because you weren't here for that whole drought, right? You're not solely responsible. And I think the fun thing about this team this year and the players that have been added is that they really look at it and they're like, well, we're going to be the ones to end it.
When you think about the journey to get here, I'm trying to figure out realistically how much stock we should put into what this team has shown so far, because it's been less than a season, but at the same time, I think this team has developed a consistent habit of being able to respond when needing to, which gives me faith and optimism for the remainder of the season. When you look at this team, Monte McNair was asked at the press conference, or at his press conference after the trade deadline, he was asked, like, at what point or what game did he know, okay, this could be something special here? And he mentioned that Utah Jazz win in Sacramento. Was there a point for you this season where you looked at this team and went, wait, this team is legitimate. This is not just them playing above their heads or a hot start. This is who this team is and can be.
Ooh, well, there's nothing that comes to mind as like an exact moment. I do remember different games where during the course of the game, whether it was Kyle I was calling the game with, or Mark, we kind of looked at each other and it was like, wow, this is exciting. This team is exciting. And there's something really special about them. But, when you look at the fact that they went into the All-Star break, which really is 2/3 of the way through the season, in the third spot. And on my game boards, every game I track, I have the Eastern and Western Conference standings 1 through 15. And I have it on there for every game board. I wanted, before, they return against the, Trailblazers on Thursday, I want to go back and look at what game it was that they were in that third spot, because once they got to that third spot, Matt, they haven't moved. And that is a massive accomplishment. I mean, it really is. So I think and I don't remember, like I said, which game it was specifically when they going into that game, they were in third. I was like, wow, like, I can't believe that this is happening. And then there was, when they were like 7 games or 8 games above 500, I was like, whoa, what, like, it's a kind of like you're sitting here going like, what's happening? So those specific times, I was like, gosh, this is something really different.
Is there anything specific about this team, maybe traits of this team, the way they played it, just anything you've noticed that makes you gives you the most confidence in this team, or maybe like an aspect of this team where you're just like, this is why I believe in this group, this right here?
Obviously their scoring capability is really fantastic. And they have, they've been first or second in the league in scoring. It's been, Boston that was ahead of them for a while. And then when they had that string of, I think they had like 4 of 6 games where they scored over 130 points, and they haven't looked back. They've maintained that, that first place ranking in terms of points per game. They obviously score really well. And one of the things that makes them special, I believe, we talk a lot about pace in the NBA. And if memory serves correctly, they were maybe 9th or 10th going into that final game before All-Star break in terms of, their ranking and pace. But to me, they are probably the best team in the league in terms of pace in the half court. When we think of pace, we think a lot about up and down, right? But the pace that they play with when they are in the half court with the cutting and the movement and the unselfishness, I truly believe that's what makes this team special. And on Friday, I sat in with Carmichael Dave and did his morning show, which was fun. Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning again,
Good old times.
you and I, we were on that shift together, so the struggle that is the 4 a.m. wake up call for that show. But we were talking about defense, and I think that's something that a lot of people are concerned about, and rightfully so, is this team's defense. And despite the fact that, I think they give up about 117 points a game, I think that troubles people. But the reality is, I think they're like 20th or 22nd in points allowed per game, which, if you think about it, there are some things that have been massive shifts in the entire NBA this season that I've been kind of blown away by and keeping an eye on. One of them is points in the paint, right? Last year, at the end of the year, Memphis led the league in points in the paint, I think at about 59 or 56 a game. There were only 3 teams in the league that averaged 50 plus points a game in the paint. This season, consistently throughout the whole year, there are 15 or 16 teams that average more than 50 points in the paint. And scoring as a whole through the whole league is up massively. And I think that's a combination of the 3-point game, but how deadly teams are and how many 3-point shooters they have directly also impacts their ability to score in the paint, because it opens up the floor and stretches it, and it opens up lanes and all of those things. So, you look at the Kings giving up 116, 117 points a game, and they're still like around 20th, 22nd. And then, the crazy thing to me, and when I was on the show with Dave, I was talking about it. I was like, yeah, people are concerned about the defense. I understand there's certain things, especially, how many points in the paint they're giving up, that kind of thing, that are a little bit troublesome, because it puts a lot of pressure specifically on Domantas Sabonis, who has such a heavy load to carry on the offensive end. And then you're putting him in positions where he's in having to defend in the paint, and it's leaving him susceptible to fouls. But the reality of it is, I'm like, listen, to me, I kind of, I pay attention to the rankings, but the eye test is so important. And I said, to me, they're a much better team defensively in the fourth quarter than the overall numbers show. And I said, specifically, like the last 6 to 5 minutes of the game, this team has really shown the ability to close games. And in this league, you can't just close games by outscoring people. And how fantastic, the Twitterverse is. It can provide some really beneficial stuff. It's not just a cesspool all the time. And someone got on it and they looked it up, and the Kings ranked 9th in defense in the fourth quarter. And I think even if you narrow that down to the second half of the fourth quarter, it would be even higher. So those are things to me that I look at and I'm like, that's a really positive thing, really beneficial, that kind of helps paint the story of this team. Now, we know that going into the playoffs, it's much different. I mean, the game slows down a little bit. You're playing the same team for up to 7 games. You're scouted better. It's easier to make adjustments game to game. Your scoring is going to go down. You're going to have to rely more on your defense. So I think that's going to be a really important factor for the Kings, heading into the playoffs, is the ability to really make game by game adjustments. And so when you look at the series, like against Dallas, where you play in back to back, there's been several. There's been Denver, there's been Houston. We've got OKC coming up where you play them back to back games. Like those games, Minnesota, they're really important, because I think it's as close to a playoff series as you can experience. And that's good. That's a good test for them as the regular season goes on, and gives us a good indication of potentially what they might be like in a playoff series.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. We're past the midway point of the NBA season. It's the perfect time for you to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. What a no-sweat first bet is let's say you bet on the Sacramento Kings to beat the Portland Trail Blazers by 4.5 points or more, so 5 points or more, essentially. Well, if you get that bet wrong, let's say the Kings only win by 3 or the Blazers win, you could get up to $1,000 of bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. It's basically an insurance policy on your first bet. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for chances at bigger payouts with a same-day parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So let me ask you this about the fourth quarter defense going forward. If we're talking about the next step in the development of this team into hopefully a championship contender, what do you think it takes for this team to bring that defensive success beyond just the fourth quarter, maybe into the second half or as they close into three quarters? And I know 48 minutes, a full game, is extremely difficult to do. It takes elite defensive teams in order to do that. But what is it the same way like we look at fourth quarter Fox happens maybe because De'Aaron doesn't have to play as hard the first three quarters and he can rely on his teammates, and then he has the energy in the fourth quarter. Do you think it's the same way, like the defense just settles in the fourth, or what do they have to do to turn one good quarter of defense into a good half of defense consistently?
Yeah. Well, I think naturally, as the course of the season goes along, you realize, like, listen, this is an 82 game season. This is a grind. And so I think, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, players they ration out their energy, what they've got in the tank, if you will. And so I think that when you go into postseason, no matter how tired you might be, your adrenaline, your excitement level, that is something that you can channel to really exert more energy, more focus, more fine-tuned performances on the defensive and offensive ends. And, we look at De'Aaron and kind of how he's played this year, and he is first in clutch points in this league, which is really, when you look at the players that are clutch players, Jason Tatum, DeMar DeRozan, like those types of guys come to mind that are, clutch. And he is, one of those guys. Kyrie Irving, same LeBron James, like he is leading the pack in terms of, clutch points, which is really fantastic. But I kind of look at, and how this to me relates a little bit to them defensively, I feel that one of the least talked about things with this team this season has been specifically De'Aaron Fox's attention to detail and commitment to the defensive end. And that is, I feel like you can completely put that on Mike Brown and how he approaches not only just games, but how he approaches coaching star players. He demands a lot from his star players because that is the trickle down effect. If he is on Domantas Sabonis, if he's on De'Aaron to be great and to really push themselves and challenge De'Aaron on the defensive end, then other players step up. And I feel that De'Aaron has really been fantastic in that area. Massive improvement than what we've seen his first 4 years in the league. Right. And so to me, he's kind of focused a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball to start games. And it's the second half, the third, and then the fourth quarter where he really starts vamping up his offense and looking at that. But a few games prior to the All-Star break, we saw him really come out in the first quarter attacking offensively. And I think that that's something we're going to have to see from him more as the season goes on, and specifically like a playoff run, right? Is that he's going to have to be able to have that attention to detail, that commitment on the defensive end from the start of games, but as well realize that he's going to have to work just as hard on the offensive end to start games as well, because that's really what's going to make things easier for everybody else. If he is that scoring threat, attacking the paint, getting to his spots, that is going to open things up for Keegan, for Harrison Barnes, for Kevin Herter. It's going to give them better shots. And so those are the types of things you look at, right? In terms of, what can we expect? What should we be able to expect? What needs to happen? And with, and this is kind of heavy as the crown, right? And he's got to wear it. He's got to be the guy that is giving it all on both ends of the floor for as close to 48 minutes as possible. And it's a huge load to carry. But, I think that he is mentally in the space where he is capable of doing that here going forward.
When you look at, we think about the offensive success of the Sacramento Kings, but over the last, I would say, couple weeks before the All-Star break, 3-point shooting as a team really was an issue. And a lot of the conversation was, tired legs and fatigue, and which is completely understandable. At what point, if we come back and start this quote unquote second half, but final stretch of the season, if the Kings come out on Thursday and they look the same, they struggle the same from 3-point range, how many games, or at what point do you get into it and go, okay, now I'm getting a little bit concerned that this team is now just, the struggles go beyond just fatigue. This team has lost their ability to stretch the floor.
I'm really not that concerned about it. I mean, there's a number of reasons. Like every team, every player kind of goes through slumps. I do feel like tired legs had a lot to do with it. They were on the road a lot prior to the All-Star break. It was really that 7-game road trip where their 3-point numbers took a dive. And, it's hard to maintain that level of accuracy through an 82-game season without slumps. But then also it's a challenge on the road, right? You're outside of your environment, the environment that you're most comfortable in. There's a feel for a building, for an arena in terms of shooting. So I think, there's a lot of little factors that played into that. You look at Harrison Barnes, right? And you can kind of narrow this down when we're talking about the Kings as a team to narrowing it down to a player. Correct? Like Harrison really struggled throughout the first, 20 games of the season. And then once January hit or middle of December, I'm trying to remember correctly, because it has been a week and a half since I've looked at my game notes and updated them. So I'm a little out of practice in terms of my memory. But he had a massive turnaround, and he was, he and Keegan was the number one 3-point shooter in the month of December. He struggled all through November. He turned it around, right? Mm-hmm. November, a long month. We were like, oh no, like what's going to happen to him as a shooter? Is this what we're going to see all season? And we were thinking the same about Harrison. And then you go January, Harrison and Keegan, number 1 and number 2 in 3-point shooting. And I mean, his numbers went up. He went from, basically doubled his attempts, right? Because he was in a groove. He was feeling it. He was really accurate with his 3-point shot. So I think that when you look at a team, it's the same thing, right? Like teams can struggle. And I think the All-Star break should do them a little bit of good. They're going to be on the road here a bit as well, coming back from the break. So you kind of wonder about that. But overall, to answer the question, Matt, I'm not concerned about it, because one of the good things that have come out of this is we have seen them win games without shooting the 3 well. And I mean like games where the opponent is making 17, 18, and they're making 8. And they're still winning games. So that is a promising sign to me that this team knows how to win despite maybe struggling from 3, that's not their sole identity, right? And you have to be able to weather those storms, because you're going to have them during the course of a game, during the course of a month, during the course of a season. You're going to have those slumps, those periods where things aren't clicking, something's not working as well for you. But how do you kind of recover? How do you win games? So I think Kevin Herter's a great example of that as well. His 2-point accuracy, God, he went through a stretch, I think on that road trip, where his 3-point shooting was really horrendous. But 2-point shooting, he was over 90%. And that's not layups, right? It's getting into the paint, it's pull-up shots, it's those types of things. And he was doing incredibly well at it. So those things are promising signs to me, that they don't have to rely just on their ability to knock down threes to win games and be successful.
Finally, Kayte, we talk a lot about playoff experience and this team getting playoff experience and how significant that could be for the next step of De'Aaron's evolution and really just this group as a whole. But what about the experience of these final 25 games, this final stretch of the season where every game could mean a playoff seed? And of course, it doesn't take too steep of a drop off for the Kings to fall out of the top six. Now, I personally feel very confident that this team is going to secure a top six spot. I think they've earned that trust so far this season. But when you're talking about the experience of every single meaningful game from here on out, just to get to the playoffs and what that means for De'Aaron and for this group, what do you think about that experience in addition to hopefully playoff experience?
Well, you look at the guys on this roster that have had playoff experience, right? And it's very limited. Kevin Huerter has had playoff experience. Harrison Barnes, I believe that I'm trying to remember right now. Gosh, in terms of, I think Domas has playoff experience. Am I correct in that?
I think so. I think you're right.
I think so. But again, it's limited, right? It's not like, there's a lot of guys on this roster that have been in the playoffs every single year. Like, it's just, that's not the reality. So that's where I think you really have to rely on your coaching staff, which Mike Brown has a ton of experience. His coaching staff has a ton of experience. And it's about how they deliver messages to them, how they keep them focused, how they prepare them, and kind of the general conversation and how they hold guys accountable. I think that's going to be really, really important for them moving forward through the final 25 games. But also, I do agree. I think they're going to secure a top six spot. I think they've earned that faith, that trust, that belief, right? At this juncture, 55 plus games into the season, and they're in the third spot in the Western Conference. And yes, it is going to be difficult. It is going to be a battle because they've got Phoenix, I believe, 2 more times. That's a team that just acquired Kevin Durant, and they're healthy finally. You look at the changes the Lakers made. Like, I would not want to be a team that has to play the Lakers in a play-in game, right? Just because you go back to talking about playoff experience. That's where it really comes in handy, right? When your back is against the wall and it's like a play-in scenario. And you look at Dallas, the changes that they have made. I mean, the Clippers, and I'm curious what's going to happen with that. I mean, we face the Clippers on Friday. I don't know what the status of Westbrook is going to be at that point. I don't know how Westbrook is going to impact that team. So when you look at all these changes, specifically in the Western Conference, it's like, yeah, on paper, it looks great, but they don't have any established chemistry yet. And they have to establish it at the most difficult time of the season where, it's the final stretch. Teams are focused, prepared a little bit better. So, I look in that sense as like, there are some things that are on the Kings side. They do have a difficult schedule going forward. They are going to be on the road a lot. And you look at specifically the very end of March and through the last week of the season, and really the last, week and a half of the season, they go on a stretch where, on the 29th of March, they play at Portland. They're on the road for 2 games, come back for 1 game. And they, over that, what is it? 5-7 game stretch, they have 2 home games. That's to end the season when the race is really, really getting narrowed down and tight and the pressure is on. So they have a difficult schedule. I'm hoping that, everything they've been through the course of the season, it's going to prepare them to kind of weather those storms.
I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here right before we wrap up. And I don't know if you have the schedule open in front of you, and you don't even have to name a specific team if you don't want to, or a specific game if you don't want to, but it's been fun imagining when the Sacramento Kings clinch and just the reaction, the joy of the fan base who hasn't had that in obviously 16 years. In your mind, whether it's home or on the road against a specific opponent, do you have like this dream scenario or ideal scenario of, man, I would love for the Kings to clinch at this point?
No, I guess I haven't really allowed myself to think of it in that way, and I think probably a lot of it is because I have been here for almost the entirety of the playoff drought. And so I've never had to train my mind to think that way. You know what it's like, Matt, every single year, it feels like, specifically, let's say since De'Aaron got here, it's really like the last 2 weeks of the season where they're hoping that they might be able to get into the play-in, or, they're right on the cusp and a lot of things have to go their way. They have to handle some things, but also other teams have to help them out. And so for us, it's always been, our minds have been trained like the last 2 weeks of the season, like, oh my gosh, like, are they going to be able to sneak in? Are they going to be able to sneak in? So I've never been in a position where I'm like, I hope they clinch in game, 62. And you know what I mean? Like, it's not, I was thinking about it actually yesterday. I was on mom duty and I was driving in my car and listening to Disney music. So I was in my brain thinking about like, gosh, the season and getting ready to kind of go back to work after the All-Star break ends. And I was thinking like, gosh, I wonder around when it's going to be that we'll know and what it's going to feel like to be like, oh, we're going to the postseason no matter what.
Right.
Like I cannot, in my brain, I'm still like, what is that going to feel like? Because I've never experienced it.
Well, it's going to be amazing. I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when. I'm calling my shot. I feel pretty confident in this team. It's going to be amazing when we get to experience that. And Kayte, you and the broadcast team deserve it just as much as the media members and just as much as the fans do. So we're very excited to have that moment. Hopefully it happens. Looking forward to this race and looking forward to extremely meaningful basketball for the remainder of this season. You, of course, with Drapes and Mark and everybody on the broadcast team will do a great job over there. Appreciate you taking the time, and maybe we'll do a little playoff preview podcast.
Yeah, let's do a playoff preview. Let's put it out there in the universe, man.
Love it. We'll put it down on the calendar. Really appreciate Kayte taking the time here. It's a very, very busy time for her. It's a very busy time for everybody, but she's always so generous with her time here on Locked On Kings and always willing to come on the podcast. I know you appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it. The perspective that she provides is excellent. I'm really happy for her. She's been here as long as we've been here, right? She's been working, covering this team as longer than I've been covering this team, but as long as most of us have been watching this team during the playoff drought. So to have the excitement for her career to be able to call these extremely meaningful games, I know is excellent, and she's going to do a phenomenal job as always. So thanks to Kayte, and I hope, in fact, I know we are going to be having a playoff preview podcast together coming up in a little over a month or in a couple months. So I can't wait for that. Appreciate your support of today's podcast. You want to respond to anything we talked about? You want to share with me? Just let me know how you're feeling. Okay, like it's the calm before the storm. How are you feeling about the remainder of the season? Are you stressed? Are you excited? Are you worried? Are you in doomsday mode? Let's talk about it. Let's talk through it. We're here together. It's a safe spot. At Matt George Sack on Twitter. You can tweet me publicly or DM me privately. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com if you'd like. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. I cannot wait to get this started. It is going to be chaos and a lot of fun here on Locked On Kings, and I hope you'll stick with me for the entire ride. And beyond that, all those new listeners, thank you. Welcome. I hope you stick around. For all my OGs, we made it. Well, we kind of made it. We made it to extremely meaningful games in end of February, March, and April. That's exciting in itself. But we've been together for a long time, and this is what we've been waiting for. So let's get it started. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.